Bum, 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 bum.
All right, we're live. Hi, Don.
Hey, Julien. How are
Hey,
you?
I'm doing pretty good. I want to say we got a lot of things to talk. Well, a few things to talk about, but a lot about several of them. So I've been pretty
Okay.
excited. I had a conversation with my brother this afternoon, which I'd like to talk about. I'd like to talk about the hurricane experience that you got to enjoy last week. And the last thing, if we can fit it in, let's talk about the energy of what's going on and these wild and crazy times, because
Well, there we go.
I think everyone's wanting to talk about that. First, I want to make sure we are alive. I'm just checking my screen here. I have a second computer because originally it was tying me down a little bit. I want to make sure we're live before I go too much further. Yeah, it looks like we are.
Okay.
And I'm going to share it to my personal page.
There we go.
So if you guys are not familiar, it's originally gets posted on my public page, and then I share on mine. I'm going to say something nice and cute, like, "We're live, everyone."
That is nice. I don't know how cute, but
I'm going to go, "We're live, everyone."
Crystal says you guys are going to get your own wild weather starting tomorrow and a potentially dangerous storm again on Saturday.
Oh, well, these dangerous storms these days never turn out to be what we think they're going to be. But
I'll,
again, again,
I'll bark and no bite, right?
all bark and no bite. Anything to stir the pot, something like that.
There's something like that. And yeah,
But again, in each of our own worlds, which is more and more true these days, I'm sure people are getting timeline experiences that really sort of do bark up their tree, I would say. So,
absolutely.
so speaking of which,
Go ahead.
how did last week go? Since you yourself were originally in the path.
The interesting thing about the hurricane, well, first of all, yeah, we were in the path and really told to kind of batten down the hatches.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it was even Thursday morning, I got up and I hadn't decided if I was going to put the hurricane shutters up because, one, I'd never done it before. And so I'd be figuring it all out, but
And your
I
house
didn't know it.
just comes equipped with them?
Yeah, I mean, these, there's so many different models, but the ones that when we bought the house, they were just stored in the garage. They're like these panels that you
Mm.
take out and you have to attach to the window and several to each window. But it still looked Thursday morning like we were. There was a good chance that we were going to get a big amount of impact from the hurricane here in Miami,
Mm-hmm.
and even where I live, which is on the south side of Miami. I spent about 2 hours putting up the shutters, and by the time I came back in and checked the weather, we were out of consideration for other than maybe some rain, the whole storm. So I thought that seemed really kind of odd. If I was going to manifest that, I would have wanted to manifest it before I put the shutters up. But and then it was really interesting because watching the news reports all day, it was speculation of where it was going to hit. It was going to be just north of Fort Lauderdale, and then it was West Palm Beach going further north. And
Mm-hmm.
by the time I went to bed, they were expecting it to make landfall about Cape Canaveral about 3 o'clock in the morning. When I woke up the next morning,
Okay.
it had passed that and still hadn't made landfall at, I don't know, 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning when I got up. And it really didn't hit land until it got up into Georgia and the Carolinas. And I don't know how much really mean, they had flooding and they had a impact from the storm, but it wasn't as bad as anybody anticipated it. Now, it was also
for anywhere in Florida, is that right?
really pretty much from what I saw, nowhere in Florida was. I mean, there was rain, there was storm, there was high tides, and that sort of thing. But the impact, it really seemed to stay offshore, all the way up the coast. And it was really interesting. I don't know if you read Ben Fulford's piece on Monday.
No,
but
I didn't catch that.
He talked. I know I usually send that to you, but he talked about the hurricane as if it was just a figment of the media's imagination. Now I know that there was, or the point was that I saw a lot of people experiencing it and all that kind of stuff. I can't attest to that because I saw really nothing. We just got some rain and that was about it. But we were, it was supposed to be pretty active in my neighborhood.
And all the satellite imagery suggested that.
Suggested it, and all of it, yes.
And the story about Haiti getting.
Yeah, Haiti, and those stories have continued, and Cuba and all that. But it really, and there was in the Bahamas got hit, but the Bahamas didn't get hit as bad as what it was intended, or what they were originally talking about. And then there's no talk turned that it was going to boomerang and come back and hit us, later this week, maybe tomorrow. And now I've seen nothing about it. When I was looking for it yesterday, I said, whatever happened to that part of the story that it was going to boomerang and hit us again? And it doesn't appear that there's anything left of it. So
there's nothing to talk about.
Yeah, so there's nothing to talk about.
Or people are carefully trying to change subject over what they were talking about and hoping it just sort of what they're painting is try to discreetly move on to the next story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's not that the hurricane fizzled. A lot of people had a tremendous amount of trouble, just not necessarily in the United States. I know there's some pretty crazy flooding. I think I saw some crazy flooding video, floating around Facebook, where basically this guy's watching his whole neighborhood getting just flushed away while he's on, a stable 6th, floor building or something like that. So sort of there's still a lot of data that people can attest to that there were people that went through a hell of a time,
Right.
And that hell of a time, how we talk on this show. A hell of a time means a hell of a transformation and opportunity at the same time. And within that context, isn't it interesting to have gotten that story about our good friend who is going to become an angel?
Yes.
It turns out that he ended up just becoming an apostle instead, in some cases.
That's not necessarily a demotion, is it?
That's not exactly a demotion. I mean,
Okay.
that's kind of still getting your information out, right?
Right.
And your lessons learned and all that sort of thing. Now, it's not that, we're in the position to talk about him being an angel. He's already gone through the angel academy and gone through his time being an angel. He's not an angel at this time. He for our period in this period in time, he is not an angel. It's odd when you hear the story of when an angel goes back into the incarnation cycle, right, and returns as someone that wants to explore and spark lots of other opportunities of growth. It's not that common, but it usually happens when an angel meets somebody special here and decides to sort of cut the rope in a way. And
Okay.
it doesn't mean that they aren't aware of their journey, but they gradually begin to forget as the veil closes in, as they begin to associate their life with the human life. And but their powers tend to fade very quickly, like their privileged skills and abilities and this sort of thing. They're always eternally blessed because of the service that they've offered. So they always have a pretty easy life in many ways. And when they invite transformation or catalyzing experiences, it's usually a lot more, let's just say that they go through it in a much more calm perspective. They still sort of stand out as people.
Right.
I believe his apostlehood came before he became his angel, or got into that angel status.
Okay.
So one of his lifetimes, or maybe more than one of his lifetimes, he was able to bring that forward, and was recognized and all that sort of thing. But to hear that Haiti particularly got blasted, since Haiti was where the original story originated from, and further sort of emphasizes the focus of the story that we had. It's as if Haiti went through something, and as if we as listeners, or you as someone that we know lives in Miami, got to have sort of like an experience for how to like transcend, the experience happening again. So it's almost like again, Haiti took the hit for us in a way. Haiti took the lesson in the face, that sort of thing. And in many ways, when we have sort of like an enduring respect for something, or appreciation, even before we know what sort of benefits can come from it. So let's just say, hey, all you gotta do, Don, next time is, write your next hurricane a love letter or something, and you'll be spared. Before you understand what the consequences would be, always that humble approach, that forgiving or respect, or that requesting of forgiveness will always set you up for the fast track. I don't want to say the fast track is another way of saying putting your life into, let's say, an easier way. It's like when you want to overcome fear and negativity, the path of love, and note that forgiveness is a form of love, and respect is a form of love, and appreciation is a form of love. They're just taking on different forms. Those are means by which you can accelerate the journey towards one that you feel is blissful, peaceful, and enduring in a beautiful sense, like something you want to write home about how wonderful it is. So the more that we follow that journey, the more you'll find how easy it is you bless yourself through the process of doing any of that. So when you look at historically, where the gods had to be sort of respected, otherwise they'd smite you, like that. Hold on, it looks like my camera's frozen. Can you still hear me?
I hear you, but I don't see you on Skype anyways.
Oh, okay. I think we just got a little camera. Let's turn this off and turn it back on, and no. Well, even though my camera's frozen, I'm going to finish the story, and then I'll go back and handle this.
Okay.
So when facing this sort of
You're back.
Okay. You're actually looking at a different camera, though.
Okay.
You're not looking at the one that I'm broadcasting with.
Then to go tell your story.
Okay.
I'll shut up.
Okay. So, when visiting the catalyzing experience that can allow a transformation to take place, We often don't identify that. We probably identify as like, oh no, something bad's about to happen. Most of us don't necessarily by default get ready for like, okay, here's my chance to be my best, to be a cheerleader, It's like you sort of psych yourself up for the game or something. Most of us don't get that opportunity, right? Most of us, well, I could say we all get the opportunity, but most of us don't identify the opportunity.
Beforehand, yes.
Beforehand. And so that is part because we don't want to sabotage the opportunity either. So the opportunity usually does not leave us prepared if we're going to make the most of it, especially. But we can look in your particular case, you were able to be prepared. You were able to identify and say, this is going to be a good thing. However it turns out, I'm offering my respect and my humbleness, the moment to moment. And although, you look at the news with anticipation of what's the latest news, it's not like you're going to say like, the game's blown, we're
Right.
down too many points and the game's over. It's like you have this ability to sort of like hold on to that hope and that and sort of have like that tenaciousness for what is still possible. You might want to retell the story of your game this afternoon while I hit the camera here.
Okay. Well, no, we were talking beforehand. I was telling Julien about watching the Cub game last night. Hi, Rusty. I know you took notice of that too, I'm sure. But Cubs last night could have clinched the series against San Francisco, and 8 innings of the game they weren't doing anything, and 9th inning, down by 3 runs. I'm sitting here watching the game, and I just nope. I just felt that this was my timeline says they're going to win this ball game, and boom, boom, boom. They scored 4 runs with only 1 out in the inning, and took a 6-5 lead and ended up winning the game.
And they move on.
And move on, and I'm not taking credit for it. They made some great plays and all that kind of stuff, but I just knew my timeline, where I was, and it's the same. And I did this visualization with the hurricane too, where I was kind of standing on the state of Florida, either like standing on a map on the ground or a giant standing overhand and just blowing the hurricane out to sea. And on the one hand, I knew that for that to happen, that maybe those who were looking for the experience of the hurricane may be missing out on it. But I knew that I had no desire to play with that hurricane, and so that's the visualization I took.
And it
stayed off the coast.
And it stayed off the coast, so we could even say we owe you some thanks, maybe, or some gratitude. Don't have to, because in the end, it's all you in the first place.
The center of my universe.
Yeah, you're wearing your jersey right now, right?
I am wearing my jersey right now. The Cubs.
So I bet your daughter's really a big fan.
No, she's not.
She's not.
She can't stand. I can't get her to watch.
Oh, is it just baseball or the team itself?
Yeah, baseball. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And because I'm a Cub fan, then she just really wants nothing to do with it.
Oh my God, that's cute in its own way.
Yeah. And today's her birthday, so I just got back from celebrating with her, so that was fun.
Great. You do cake and ice cream and.
It's sushi.
Sushi. That's the new cake.
Well, that's what she wanted, was sushi. So.
I wouldn't argue with her. If you know a good place, there's not much better than sushi.
Yeah.
So, moving on, I had a very interesting discussion with my brother, and I didn't tell him I was going to do this on the air. So if he's catching this after the fact, or if any of my family members have to be catching the fact, know that I feel pretty confident he would have let me share what I'm talking about. It gets a bit complex, and it's kind of a new subject here on our show because we haven't talked about it very much, but it's not so different. So he's been getting guidance towards Breatharianism. Now, do you know what that is, Don?
No, I do not.
Breatharianism is the practice of not eating, but living a healthy life.
Okay.
Right? Some people do it in conjunction with sun gazing, and some people just don't. But it's not for anyone, as you can probably imagine.
Right.
I thought that there was maybe a dozen people out there, and so they're far and few between. You know, like it's an archaic thing. I mean, I don't want to say archaic. It's ancient practice.
Right.
So
like almost you'd have to be in a cave in the Himalayas.
Yeah, or you'd have to be like Buddha,
do
under the banyan
Right.
tree. Just, and the only way to get through it is to slow your heart rate down or something.
Right.
But as it turns out, he got guided into it and he began to research it and found that there's like thousands of people living without eating or drinking water. Like that kind of like blows the mind. I mean, right off the bat. That's some sort of superhero thing, right? Even though you don't, go charging, into a burning building saying, "This is my superhero ability. I don't get tired from not eating," or something like that. It is pretty superheroic, all things considered, because there is a lot of pluses that come from it. Like, for instance, a very high level of mental clarity, right? You might all recognize that that's the word I was using for the shift that has occurred within me since late August. A high sense of clarity. Moving on. He's prompted to do this, and he goes through some pretty significant digestive transformations, or significant digestive discomforts that lead to his overall same symptoms I had, which is like not, basically puking up or basically sitting on the toilet and losing everything that you're eating, right? Not being able to keep food down. Like, that's a special kind of flu, right? I'm going to make a connection with, swine flu in a minute. But this element of having this sort of flu where you get so sick that you start losing weight because you can't keep the food in, or that the food is going nowhere, or that you're just so disgusted with eating. He had no fear about that. Like, he had no fear of death. Like, he's been through enough near-death experiences that death doesn't scare him off like some people. And he knew, and he was telling me, and I was like, this, have I accomplished my life's purpose? And if I haven't, then I'm going to be sticking around through this somehow, after this point. Like, I'm not afraid because I don't feel like I'm done here.
Right.
And it's not like I feel like I'm done, like, oh, spare me and give me a last chance or something like that. It's more like, hey, I still got a lot of things I want to get done, you know?
I do the same. I say the same thing about carbs.
About carbs?
It's like with carbs, because if I haven't finished my purpose, then these carbs are not going to hurt me. So I can give me some more pasta.
There you go. I love it.
No guilt.
Perfect.
Yes.
And I'm serious. Like, you're gonna find out here more through this story exactly how on point that approach is. So he goes through what he identifies as extreme flu, to the point where he doesn't have any energy. Like, he is, his bowels are empty. He is basically flushed out, and he is hardly able to walk. Like, that level. Now, that's the level I got to when I was first admitted to the hospital. Funny enough, within days of his experience. Okay? Within days of his experience. And not only that, he eventually recovers. Everything comes back. but he's not so hasty with getting back into food. In fact, he's actually feels a little bit different about food. So his recovery was not based on eating a bunch of food, funny enough, and getting all his weight back from eating food. He recovered almost systematically separately from eating food, as I understand. Mm-hmm. And so he followed the message of Breatharianism and found out that many people, like the story of how people become Breatharianism, it goes from studying it and working towards it to it happening spontaneously for people, right? And anywhere in between in terms of how quickly it goes. So he's found out that he doesn't get hungry any longer. Now, he also has extreme, wonderful clarity of mind. When I say clarity, people might say, "Oh yeah, clear. What does that mean? You could do math easier, faster, or something like that." No, I mean like you just simply know things better. You're more confident behind why you know things, and things that are related to probability are not so probable anymore. They're much more literal. You're much more certain of the probability when it comes to probabilities without even knowing why. Imagine that you've connected like 20 or so other lifetimes into this one, and although they aren't there talking with you, it's as if you've got a council within yourself that gives you a much more clearer sense when you're given an opportunity to consider something. It's like you've got 10 to 20 other people with opinions that help, and the conjunction is that they all come together. It's not like you have a bunch of debates in your head. It's kind of like this is a consensus. We already know. This is how. This is what we choose. This is what we believe. This is how we see it. Right? So clarity is like practically turns you into a genius in many ways. Like, I don't know exactly what ways, because I'm sure it's quite personal from person to person. Mm-hmm. But for me, in the spiritual realm of sort of seeing like this bigger picture, seeing what the veil is made of, seeing what relationships are really astutely offering, the element of the mirror aspect that we observe our reality when we observe others, through all sorts of things. When I see them, they get clear. Kind of like if you're listening to a really great spiritual talk or something, and you come back to it like a year later, and you're like, wow, I'm getting things I didn't get the first time around, right? Right. It's like another level of the onion. No, I feel like I went through like 5 layers at once. Like it was such a dramatic shift. And he basically felt the same way. Now, there's another thing that contributes to this idea that he's headed in this direction more and more. He hasn't stopped eating, by the way, okay? But he eats about once a day. He's basically dinner. And he doesn't eat as much. But, he's a little bit concerned about his family not quite, getting this thing that they might never have heard of, that he might not start eating so much, especially since he's kind of like the cook in the house, too. So he's sort of like keeping it a bit, undercover a little bit. We'll just say that, because he also doesn't know anybody's life that he can have a conversation about this with besides me and maybe one other brother or something, like even in his own family. Right. So he spent about a week getting healthier. After that, after he got through that flu phase or something like that, and he had a big camping trip, this big family camping trip that I at one point was slated to go, but as it turns out, it was really not meant to be. I was meant to be, back here in Seattle and going through my thing, where he recovered from basically feeling entirely feeble in about a week and a half, feeling just great, and going and doing a 18 kilometers of hiking on one day, very rigorous canoeing for about an hour and a half, swimming across a river and back. And we wouldn't say he's, an Olympian or someone that does exercise every day. He's a computer programmer. He sits in a chair, So it's not like, you'd expect him to have this sort of energy reserves. But, and every time that he did one of these things, he says, oh, I'm going to be sore after this, or I'm going to be sore tomorrow. He said no, was not sore, like recovered within minutes after every single one of those 3 experiences. Said, no, I don't know why, but I feel just fine. I've like caught my breath, no injury. Like no, painful in the moment in terms of, taking action, but not too painful that he couldn't, do it, and only to come out on the other end with no consequence. Mind you, he's also not eating a lot. Like he's not eating as much as before. So did he
have an idea of what his motivation was to even take on these athletic tasks, or?
Well, this is part of the camping trip, right? I mean, they all went canoeing. Like, for instance, they had this big barrel that they were storing things in, this big fat barrel. And I guess it was full of stuff. And it was put in his canoe with my oldest brother, who is athletically inclined, but still they also had a much heavier boat. And, some of my younger brothers had a faster boat, and they're lighter and leaner and younger. And they're like, hey, man, can't you, split some of the load here? Can't you take this? And they're like, no, And they're basically, like, far more adept. And this is obvious because they could do, like, circles around them, right? Like, that level of, that's how much more energy they had access to with comparison to my oldest brother and my brother Matthew.
Okay.
So Matthew, basically, he's telling me about how he's, like, canoeing as, like, we're trying to get back. And it's kind of windy, and there's like waves and everything, and they're like going to, they're cutting through the waves. But even so, he starts to look at the shoreline, and he tells his brother, I don't think we're going forward. I think we're just, paddling, and we're not going anywhere. So he says, okay, well, we got to really go, as hard as they can. This is this is what he did. It's like this, like paddling like it was, save his life or something.
Uh-huh.
And it ended up like taking like an hour and a half. When going the other direction, I think he said it took like half an hour at a leisurely rate.
Right.
So this is like really intense experience. And I don't know if any of y'all gone canoeing, but it can be pretty darn tiring, especially if you go full tilt for like even like 10 or 15 minutes. I've been there. I've lived on the river. We used to have a canoe. I know what it's like. So that amazed me. Also, this hiking trip involved a whole bunch of a lot of it was along a road. To be honest, there was pretty level ground, and then there was some elevation at the end. It's 9 kilometers each way. What's that, like 6 miles? 6 mile one way. It's 12 miles total. I mean, that is not a small hike, no matter how you place it, even if you're going a good on the road. But the other thing was, his son was collecting really beautiful rocks that were kind of crystalline, and he felt energy from them, and he started to collect these rocks. And he's like asking his father, my brother, to help him. And he's like, no, man, let's leave him here. We'll get him on the way back. Like, make piles of rocks and, that sort of thing. But even so, on the way back, they're carrying, like, 2 backpackfuls of rocks. Taking up space, not just I can't carry this because it's heavy, but like it doesn't fit anymore. That level of carrying rocks back. And he's like, oh man, this is gonna hurt, or something like that. No, none of that. It's like he was literally in the best health that he could ever be in for some reason that would escape normal science, we might even say. And so between, the canoeing, the hiking, and the, what was the other one? It was
swimming a
yeah,
river.
so swimming across a river. Swimming across a river. And he's like,
Yeah.
whoa, I'm tired. You're like, oh, he's like, I'm pretty tired getting to the other side. Like, I'm not sure how I'll get back, because I'm thinking I'm going to be dead on that
Mm-hmm.
side. I don't know how I'm going to get back. But, he just sort of like, paces himself. He just basically paced himself and got himself there. And then when, he got there, he's like, oh, I'm not really tired. Oh, okay, that's nice. And then when it's time to go back across, he's like, oh, it was just basically the same story over again. Like, he didn't have less energy going back. So it's like, huh. And he was like noticing, like, this is wild. Like, this is not the body I was born with, it feels, or the one I've been living with recently. So he's taken a strong interest in Breatharianism and has looked into it. And if anybody else is interested by hearing about this for the first time, go ahead and take a look. It may be that during this transformation, that some of us have gone through some physical transformations that have made us a little bit mutant, we might even say.
Right.
The other thing you did notice is that he had 2 teenagers that were his daughter and his son, and they moved out at the beginning of September. And that has also changed the energy in the house significantly, like towards the wonderful, like beautiful, beautiful things, like no more, brother and sister fighting or drama or whatever it is, So he's noticed that, like, people come over, and although he hasn't changed his furniture or anything, people are just, like, happier there. Like, his wife's happier, the kids are playful and jumpy all around. They're not, like, crying or whatever. I mean, this is like, some sort of fairy tale ending or something,
Sure.
And I know it sounds kind of, oh, Julien, I thought you were going to say he got visited by a Pleiadian and got blessed by it and, or something like this. But I'm like, no, this is pretty remarkable on its own. And I endear others to share stories that they come across that might be similar.
Well, and I mean, keep in mind, the whole idea of aliens, and specifically with you and what we talk about on this show, the Pleiadians. This idea, this meme has been around for a long time.
Yeah, I didn't invent aliens.
No. But the idea of how those people who are already in a position to say, I believe in this and I want to have this experience or whatever. It's almost like the idea of that and the idea of ascension are parallel. In fact, I watched video Gaia on Gaia.com today where George Norrie was interviewing David Wilcock, and it was called Disclosure and Ascension, I think is what the title of it was. But that this whole idea of disclosure of aliens or the idea of being visited by aliens or off-worlders and this idea of ascension are parallel, and that it's like one step along the path that you're going to be accomplishing both things, and both things have to be there in order to do the other thing. And the idea, though, is that ascension doesn't require that you even know about off-world beings or what have you. It's an individual process, but it's also it's something very different than just this one idea, one aspect that seems to cloud over everything else, which is the idea of sitting down with a bunch of blue or green people or grays or what have you, and discussing last night's Cub game.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Last night's Cub game.
But and you look back at like the TV series Heroes, and it came back as Heroes Reborn, where people were changing and they were developing these different
spontaneous abilities. Yeah,
these spontaneous abilities, and that this is more so than that had nothing to do with meeting Pleiadians and that sort of thing. So,
however.
However,
if you're a super comic book nerd, you'd say it does, because that's when all sorts of people from outer space start visiting Earth, like Superman and stuff, like cosmic beings. Like in comic books, there's the person who's a mutant, so he's born and there's some sort of trigger and he has powers. Then there's the transhuman, which is basically a human that's altered by science, right? So the Hulk would be considered a transhuman because science made him the Hulk, and Spider-Man would be considered transhuman because he was bit by a radioactive spider, right? And then there's cosmic-based, which is, aliens essentially, people not from the planet, that come here with abilities like Superman, for instance. So playing with all three, I think is probably going to be our larger truth. For instance, maybe technology will lead to superhuman abilities. Perhaps the spontaneous awakened states take places as well, and perhaps extraterrestrial influence.
I'm not saying that it's not all there for the taking. Like a buffet. On Easter Sunday, going to buffet, and all that food is there, and all those options are there. It's just listening to Matthew's story that the journey that he's on, it has nothing to do with talking to Pleiadians or talking about meeting an extraterrestrial. His body is changing. His experience is changing.
Yeah, and he's not doing long hours of yoga or sitting under a tree or anything like that. He's just intending to live his life the best way, at the highest potential that he can possibly, foresee or intend.
Right.
I love my brother, and he is 6 years older than me, and a real basic history. He had ulcerative colitis when he was a teenager, late teenager. And he ended up going to the hospital. And it was very, very traumatic for the family because we had never really been to the hospital before, except for when he was a bit younger and he broke his arm. He's like one of the only kids who breaks things in our family and his family. Okay. I think he broke his arm twice. But, the time where he went to the hospital and I remember, it was attributed to this idea that he just went loose and ate junk food. But I think part of it came from the fact that maybe my father and mother told him he was eating junk food, then that he was wasting his time, and then he was lazy or whatever. Like, enjoying a life, where a kid's actually earning money and can do whatever he wants,
Right.
How that can be so anti the parents' teachings or something like that. But he ended up having such a severe circumstance where they had his large colon removed. Ended up getting a bag by the side of his stomach. And I remember how traumatic that was. I remember crying and saying if there's anything I can do, so he doesn't die, this whole thing. Like, he looked so wretched in such a pale form that I was like, please let him live. Like, I'll do anything. Like, I know I've been a little pest to him, and and
I'll change my ways.
Not his favorite brother. We'll say that. I will, I'll rescind all my issues with him, and just become more than I could be. And later on, we got very, very close. In fact, I ended up living with him after high school. Him and his wife, and his first son, and lots of other experiences to boot. And later on, he ended up having an operation where he didn't have to have the bag anymore. It's called a pull-through, where everything is reconnected, and you sort of live that way. But, he always had sort of like that irritable bowel, symptoms, just, much lighter circumstances and this sort of thing, because there's many levels of severity with that. And back in, I want to say it was 2004, 2005, where I had my sort of like second spiritual awakening, checking out Eckhart Tolle, and then meeting Abraham Hicks's material, Life was bright and beautiful and a wonderful future. And by the end of the year, I was trying to convince my wife about how important this stuff was. And I was hitting a brick wall, and it tore at tore at our relationship.
Right.
Up to the point where I ended up having to take a job like 6 hours away in Sandpoint, Idaho. I was having difficulty with jobs and this thing. I was in a contract for 19 months. It was like the longest contract job that wasn't a hire.
Mm-hmm.
And I was stunned because, they didn't know me anything when they said it was time to go. It was like, that's it. It's time to go. There's no severance. There's no, there's nothing there. Out of the blue. No reason whatsoever. Except that at that point in my time, I was ready for life, right? I was ready to sort of like, take life by the horns and practice law of attraction and get everything I ever wanted. That sort of idea. And so, stress came in, through feeling like, I knew something and I couldn't talk about people because I was just flipping crazy, this sort of thing. And
right.
And led to right before leaving. In fact, this actually started right before I got let go, where I started developing the symptoms for ulcerative colitis. Basically perpetual diarrhea or little bits of diarrhea, but not a lot. And then after I moved, it was really bad, and I ended up having to go to a hospital in Sandpoint, and having no energy and this sort of thing. It was very, very uncomfortable, but I was in a good place. I was like, I'm going to put my happy hat on, and I'm going to put my smile on every day, and I'm going to make the best of it, And I did, despite extremely shocking experiences that came about. And yes, ulcerative colitis does tend to be, genetically passed down, if that makes any sense. But I really look at it more like everybody sort of takes a certain percentage of the transformation and, takes their cards and goes and works on it in their own space, right? It's kind of like dividing up a pie, you might say. But he had gone through it first, so he sort of like had a lot of guidance for me going through this and advice and, a lot of support. In particular, during that time where I was in Sandpoint, we talked a lot. He was very supportive, especially since I was isolated from my family. That was very, very dramatic. Only got to see him about once a month. It was tough. It was very tough. And I had, my first daughter is like 6 years old. So, around 6 years old. So I go through a journey that is a bunch of ups and downs. It includes other hospital visits and recovery, and eventually getting to a study that uses a special medication that's pretty easy for me to use. That was about 4 years ago. No, that's actually like 6 years ago now. And I was on it until the study ended, and that ended about June. And they said it would take about 2 months for the medication to sort of like leave my system, historically. But if I wanted to take the medication, all I needed was an extra $2,000 a month, and I could be on it for life if I wanted to. So I was like, nah, I'm going to save my money, and I'm going to hoard my extra $2,000 a month for myself. And I'm not going to take the medication. I think everything's just fine. People go into remission. I'm feeling the best health I've ever felt. I feel good. So for the next 2 months, I enjoy my life. I drink soda, eat candy, lots of ice cream, possibly things I wouldn't say are best for your health in my sense of programming that I've established for myself, my own belief system. And that flu starts up for me. Right. Right at the end of August. And, and I did tell everybody, September's going to be a doozy. And maybe I didn't have to say that as much, I might have.
You demonstrated it.
I demonstrated it. There's no non-dooziness in this story here. But it's not just me. A lot of people, and I know this is kind of why we're talking about it, because I know a lot of people are having some pretty exceptional health situations this last month, and maybe are still working with them right now. But I learned of no less than 7 people. Once I'd announced that it all sort of clashed, no less than 7 people that had ulcerative colitis that I had no idea had it.
Really?
No idea that they had, or IBS, which is like the entire bowel system.
Okay.
The other one is just the lower colon, right?
Okay.
So I got a lot of support. I got a lot of loving support, and almost all of them said they had issues at the beginning of the month. Like everybody did. Everybody admitted this. Now, we could say, colon issues is now becoming a much more common, issue for Americans and that sort of thing. Like everybody's sort of heard of IBS or digestive tract or autoimmune, things like that.
Right.
Pretty much it's all autoimmune. It's an autoimmune disease. If you're not familiar with an autoimmune disease, it means that your own body attacks itself. Right? Like it goes to war in your colon and turns your colon into a battlefield for seemingly no good reason. Like saying, you can't stay, we're going to fight you, or something like that. That's how I was just going to imagine. The little armies, like the little, those old games where you play armies or something.
Like Risk.
Like Risk, yeah. Let's roll the dice and see who's off the island or something. But it leads to, a large white blood count, white blood cell count, things like that. And it can lead to bleeding, internal bleeding, and all this sort of thing, which can cause, a lot of energy loss, just oxygenated blood and things like this. So, and a hell of a lot of discomfort too. But one of the more common things that comes with this is bloating too. And bloating is usually a result of a lot of bacteria dying off, actually, which is, systematic of, wars going on where bacteria are fighting bacteria and all this sort of thing. So, without getting too graphic, because obviously this is starting to get kind of graphic. Hold on, I'm trying to get myself a nice, comfortable, cross-legged position in my chair. There we go. Where I'm getting at is that, most people see it as a diet thing. Like don't eat gluten, don't eat sugar because that promotes the wrong kind of bacteria. This, that, and the other. And this is why you get ulcerative colitis or irritable bowel syndrome or whatever, diarrhea, you can even say. And now I'm finding out a whole lot more. Let's say that clarity has kicked in, and it's kind of taken things to another level in terms of what's going on. You remember when I used to say, when you eat food, during the phase of the eating, you give purpose, like intentionality to your food and what it's going to do in your body. It interprets from you what's going to happen there. That's still 100% true in my perspective. But what we actually look at now in this circumstance is that from the knowledge that I received from my brother this afternoon considering Breatharianism, it starts to look like, and this is the larger picture, that food that doesn't do you anything, like has no intention or has no purpose within you, either becomes fat in your body and stored for later. If you're the kind of person that, has a lot of savings or has the type of personality that likes to be well prepared and think ahead and is very future oriented, it's kind of like, let's pack this energy in the back trunk for when we need it. Right? And so the fat cells, in conjunction with the lymphatic system, draws on the oils and works with capturing them in the oils and places them in nice areas of your body where usually you're not using your muscles too much, because what happens is that when you use your muscles, your temperature goes up, because there's a lot of the temperature of your body temperature. When your body temperature goes up, especially near the muscles, because there's lots of electrons and neurons firing off, and that creates a lot of we'll just say a body that's running at 98.6 degrees is the temperature of how many neurons are firing at a regular degree. But in isolated areas, you can have higher temperatures. And if you get to higher temperatures, you actually make oil more liquidy, therefore getting it back into the bloodstream, right?
Okay.
So whatever sort of and I've put it, programs that are stored in the fat get moving again. And that's why a healthy body with exercise, regular exercise, yoga, which is a full body process, the more you exercise, the more you'll find that the less old memories tend to stick around, especially if you keep at it for like a month or more, because you're going to eventually get to all the areas of fat in your body and at least begin to work them away. Now, if you have a lot of body fat, it just means longer. It just means, keep at it, because eventually, you will liquefy the fat and it has a chance to move on. And in those moments, you may have a lot of drama come up for you, but typically you don't, because exercise itself promotes a positive mental vibrational state. What do they call them? Endorphins and this sort of thing. So, to keep on track, when you don't have purpose for your food, it wants to leave your body. Like, it wants to get going.
Sure.
Especially if you're not into storing it. And for that reason, guess what you get? You get some sort of hot wiring of your digestive colon, and something that'll make sure that the food gets through and moves on through. It's like, no, I didn't want anything here. So eating food that you don't actually classify as valuable can lead to either acceptance that it's not valuable, but that's all that's ever going to happen. Or if you like to eat healthy, you'll find that healthy food has a much greater opportunity in your psyche to be retained and develop a healthy body. And this is simple things like, picking a diet and believing in it. It's almost like, statistically, all diets will make you lose weight if you stick with them and believe that you will lose weight with it. That's all it takes.
Right.
Like, common denominator between all weight loss programs, successes and failures, is if you believe it, it'll work. So, I guess in some cases, pick a diet that suits your level of intelligence. I don't know. One that feels like there's such an overwhelming amount of data that you can never possibly negotiate all its problems, and you just sort of like, oh, well, why not? And it'll work for you. It's science, maybe. Maybe the more scientific ones are for the more intelligent people, and the more, whatever, are for ones that people don't sort of question too much. And that suits, and it works as it goes. And where Breatharianism comes in, it says, you know what? I don't really need food at all, because all I need to do is recognize my connection with Source. And that is a ascension symptom. It is an aspect of ascension where food is optional, where health is easy, and where clarity is abundant. So I would love to hear people's stories about, these sorts of going on. So please definitely post in the comments if you come this far, post or publish a note or something like that, because I think there's a lot of people out here at this time who would consider themselves in the more awake or way shower or light worker or spiritual community, where they're much more prepared to have some crazy ass stuff like this happen to them, we'll call it. At the same time, it's very exciting, I feel. I never looked at my hospital visits as a negative. In fact, I saw them immediately as catalyzing opportunities.
Yeah.
You could totally go to pieces like, oh no, oh my God, my life's falling apart in some ways. But I'm like, oh, actually, this is quite good. I don't have a self-body image. I mean, I've got surgery and everything that I'm recovering from. I was like, this is no problem at all. In fact, they were telling me how quickly I was recovering. They're like, oh, you're doing ridiculously good here. Your progress is astoundingly good. Like in the highest levels that we've seen for people recovering from, surgery and this sort of thing. So I was like, oh, that sounds great. Thank you. I remember even in one of the last days that I was there was like nurse teaching students, sort of thing like that, or it was a nursing school, and there was some students that came through, and they wanted to interview me as an opportunity, just so that they can get used to sort of like asking, the right kind of questions, getting my bio, and doing some basic, what do you call it there, where they check your body and stuff like that. Some basic, checking your knees and that sort of thing.
Right.
Looking in your ears and your eyes and checking your heart rate. The basic physical.
Mm-hmm.
And they couldn't have picked a better person than me, because I was like, I am going to rave about this. And I didn't even know, but she came back later on. I mean, there's like a teacher, and there's another kid that was with her in her class that had already done this and was sort of like helping out, supporting her. They asked if the whole class can come into my hospital room and she could do a presentation. So I was like, oh, well, I didn't know I was signing for that. Geez. But, absolutely. I'd love for her to give a summary. I mean, she had been with me for like an hour or something like that. Give a summary and have the classroom ask questions and everything. I found it as another opportunity to sort of like, speak my piece and, and overall really help people with this feeling of what their career was, had an opportunity to turn into, really.
Right.
That they could meet people as adoring as I was about the whole experience. And I've already talked about this. I've already talked about my hospital visit, so we're not going to get too far into that. But going back to the sort of transformation element, I started identifying with what my brothers tell me about breatharianism. I'm like, I wasn't really hungry. Like, not really. And, when your first food is hospital food, sure, you might be like, oh, this is awesome and everything. And then you're like, 3 days of hospital food, you're like, this is not awesome. I've had better than this. Yeah.
You were raving about that a little too much there at
I
the
was
beginning.
like, this is food. This is food. This is real food. I'm like, no, it's not really real food. But my taste buds were on fire, right? Taste buds were on fire. After the third day, they were not on fire. But I went through it. They're like, I was like trying all different kinds of food. I was sort of experimenting and stuff. I'd get like a lot of things off the menu, and I'd eat only a little bit of them. And I gained my weight back really fast and that sort of thing. But in the end, I found out I never really lost that much weight. Like, I looked thin, but I didn't lose as much as I thought I did when all said and done. They were going with kilograms. Yeah, shame on me for not knowing the kilogram conversion. But eventually I found out what that was in pounds. Like, well, that's it. Like, I thought I lost like 25 pounds or something, considering how uncomfortable I was. And how much length of time I had, to only enjoy liquids, basically. But I look back on it now and see that it was absolutely perfect, because I began to sort of look at food differently. Like, I hit the reset button here on food. I had, in terms of like my diet and what I was going to eat and all this, two good things. I don't know if I've already mentioned. They found out I didn't have ulcerative colitis symptoms. I had bloating issues and ulcers in my gut because I had a blockage, and that blockage turned out to be a cancerous tumor, right? So on the one hand, I was like, well, once your colon is sort of healed and, is not all stretched out and more comfortable and the ulcers are gone because of the pressure, you should be able to eat just about anything. I said, oh, great. I love that idea, because when I had flare-ups in the past, I seriously reduced my dietary, my diet and everything like that. Like really narrowed it down. And now they're telling me, oh, you don't really have to do that. Once you're sort of good, you should be good to go, right? It's just this cancer's in the way. And they're like trying to really come out. It's like, oh, Julien, sad and everything. And I'm like rejoicing inside, like, oh, it's just cancer. Oh, I'd totally take that over ulcerative colitis. Like, at least it's something new, like spin it another way or something. But I looked at it another way after talking with my brother today. That blockage was trying to get me to stop eating.
Mm-hmm.
Right? First, I had incredible diarrhea that got me into the hospital the first time. And then I got constipation after getting ulcerative colitis medication, because that's what it does. It can lead to basically slowing things down as a whole bunch. But that wasn't it. In fact, that helped, because the blockage itself of the growth appeared, and with more constipated, more thicker bowel movements, there's no way anything was going to get through there. And so that's how I led to the bloating and pain that I had following, and led to the second hospital visit. So here I am. If I were to follow the messages here, we could just say, hey, you're supposed to find out you have cancer. But even in a bigger picture, I feel like cancer spontaneously showed up to take things to the next level, take things to where I could go. Interestingly enough, I found out about sun gazing and breatharianism way back in 2004. Like, imagine if I had started then. I would have a really crazy whack job walking around today.
Yeah, you would.
Total crackpot, right? I think I'm crackpot enough for the average person, but within the context of this, I'm like, this may be another affirmation that my diet is not, which has a liberation for a completely new way of living. Mind you, I'm not putting the cart before the horse. And I'll probably be following my brother very closely, since he has, in many times in my life, sort of acted like the snowplow. He's done something, and then I get through doing the exact same thing a whole lot easier,
right, because
he has the knowledge and support, and and can be very grounding in those spaces. So here I am, rejoicing in this opportunity that feels like it's a very significant ascension process, like big A ascension process. And the more I go through it, the more I realize ascension is not like, people have talked about going to the crystalline body and then you have no more illnesses. I believe, and this is where it ties in with ETs from our earlier part of this discussion, is I believe it all goes hand in hand. Like, they all relate. Like, they all take place simultaneously in a way. Like, some disclosures taking place, people are waking up, things around the world are changing, ugliness is being put under the under the light of day and scrutinized. Talk about the latest wiki dumps. I'm not going to get into what they were, but significantly putting stuff out that is pretty heavy-handed against some candidates in the presidential election. But I did get a message earlier today when I was talking with Crystal about my brother talking about Breatharianism, and his sort of like story, is that the Pleiadians had sent me a message and they said, well, do you remember how we treat food up here? I said, I remember some details about you gardening, and you had replicators, and you had some people that actually cooked food, and this sort of thing. But you have to understand, food is one of those things they can't wait for. They can't wait to have our food, we'll say. It almost doesn't matter. It could be like just straight up Reese's peanut butter cups all day. I mean, they'll probably flip
Right.
out. It's like, we will trade free energy device for a lifetime supply of Reese's peanut butter cups. It's like, that's almost like, wait a second, that was what was on the, that was on the negotiating table. Like, presidents here are like, oh my God, we could have just given them Reese's peanut butter cups for this, or something. Like, oh, okay, like, don't show your hand, Julian, you ruined it for us.
That'll be a great opportunity to get rid of all that spam that we've built up
that
around
spam,
yeah. Guys, you'll love spam.
Yeah, but in all honesty, they're teasing us. They do have things like peanut butters because they do have nuts and that sort of thing, and they do have things like peanut butter, almond butter. They're just teasing it because they're telling me now that there was this advertisement during the time that the movie E.T. came out, where there's this little alien creature following a trail of Reese's peanut butter.
Reese's
Smarties,
Pieces. Yeah.
Reese's Pieces, because that was in the movie and it was heavily advertised and they whatever. I forgot about that, guys. Thanks a lot. But Reese's Peanuts Pieces. So what their typical day is around a 20-hour day. Like, the cycle is somewhere around 20 hours. It has a translation elements like 19.48 minutes or something to our 20 hours. Time doesn't work exactly the same, so we'll just put it in effect in the way of how much they feel they get done. That's a little bit more easier to relate to than calling it, hour to hour. 1 hour of hours is like 1 hour there versus 1 hour here. And they sleep for about 3 to 4 hours. Like, that's it. And Breatharians have claimed to be that that's all they need as well for sleep. Almost consistently across the board. We're talking like thousands here. So the next question is, well, not the next question, but the next thing that they posed was, we actually do like eating, but we don't eat all that often. We eat like maybe every other day. Okay, that sounds pretty Breatharianism, Breatharian-like. And I'm like, do you guys have a certain diet? I was like, well, it's very vegetarian. We don't really eat the livestock that we have. There are worlds in which they do that, but we just mostly have protein replicators that produce similar effects as what meat is. It's not like a copy of like a scanned-in piece of an animal, and that's what they have. It's sort of like done in a computer sort of thing. Sort of like programmed into existence, put together. Because they have, if they can clone people, they can make food apparently. And they do eat from the replicator a lot. It's kind of extra special to eat plants, that are grown, and berries and fruits and nuts and other sort of like vegetables. It is very special because those have a much longer energetic yield that comes through it, but they also have a lot more potency behind the experience. But all in all, there actually is no limit to what their diet can be. I mean, they could eat a whole cake or something if their stomach was big enough. So they don't really look at their food critically the way we do, but they do have a higher sense of enjoyment. It's kind of like if you're going to go play basketball or go to a basketball game every other day, it's going to be cherished more than you going to 3 basketball games a day, right?
Okay.
It's going to have that sort of like higher value, not because of being hungry, but because it's a bit more of a special occasion. It's a little bit more like, let's, what do we have here that we can explore? And so they're always trying to explore. And some of them joke that, tell them that, hey, the reason why we only eat once every day is because there are a lot of interesting things to eat up here. Like, we've had it all. They're kind of joking. They're playing around with the idea. But really, they don't eat for sustenance, really, at all. And when it does go through their bowels, I don't think, maybe not remembers. This is probably some recording, a year ago. They just sit down on basically what looks like a toilet seat, but is like concave. Is that when it's sort of like inward?
Yeah.
Concave toilet seat in a bathroom where, you wash your hands and where you take a shower, but nobody takes any clothes off to get all these things done. Like they're taking a sonic shower. They go in the shower and they're like, doo-doo-doo, just stand in the shower, and they don't have to take their clothes off to do it. They just like cleans them without that. They do have water showers, but the sort of like ionic shower is much more useful, and they don't have to take their outfits off that much. They also don't have like zippies, they don't have zippers or like flaps in the back. They just sit down on this thing, and it's kind of like teleported out of them. Like their bladder and their bowels are just sort of like emptied through the mechanism. They're like, and they can feel it. They're like, oh, this is done, and then they get up and they stand up. Like they have conversations with each other. It's like one big sort of like. It gives me the impression it's like a gym locker room or something like that. People are just like, hey, hey Fred or whatever, and you sit down. It's not like like in prison or something. People are like scarred by what they're seeing, or having to do something that's very uncomfortable. They just move through that phase, and so they do have like these cleaning rooms, and everybody sort of shares them. Most people don't have these cleaning rooms in their personal spaces, like their personal apartments. It's more like a bit more dormitory-like, And so they wanted to share that. But the other thing they wanted to share is that they actually get sunlight therapy. The entire ship, the one that that I connect with, has their lights on all the time. So they don't actually have a problem with electricity. They just leave their lights on. And this light is actually very, very close to sunlight, because the outer elements of the ship are able to basically take in solar energy, and the crystalline matrix central core is able to redistribute this sort of energy and even have it different from room to room, depending on people wanting to have sunlight from their own sunlight that's reminiscent of their own home solar system there and their position wherever they are. So so they basically take the local sun and the local star cluster light and use that to actually receive and add sort of like full spectrum light to people. And so they end up with sort of like the equivalent of being outside all day without getting a tan, but actually still receiving that sort of like connection to the solar bodies or the stellar bodies, so that they still receive like insight and downloads and consciousness from the stars themselves. Because without that, there's really no purpose in exploring the cosmos at all, because that's sort of like the beginnings of your journey. It's kind of like before you go to Disney World, you're enjoying reading the pamphlet and seeing the commercials and getting excited about it, and you're sort of like starting it off. You're starting off your manifestation. So a great deal of stars have lots of newsreels about what they have to offer and this sort of thing. Star clusters tend to share common, we'll call it news publications, where they're all sharing data on the same sort of page. And it comes through this way, and and it goes into their dreams, and it goes into their lives. They are affected by local star clusters in this way, and that's why localization is still very, very valuable to people who inhabit bodies, the hominid or the human-like body. So anyways, that's a bit how Pleiadians go about their food. Did you have any questions, or maybe we got some questions?
Yeah, we have a question here from Raquel. Does practicing being a Breatharian have anything to do with awakening your dormant DNA?
It does, but not in a direct one-to-one transfer. Okay? We'll just say that maybe there's another element of food I should probably indicate. That food holds the vibration of the thoughts that you're thinking when you eat it. Think of, while you're chewing your food, you're talking to food and say, you're going to be this, and you're going to be this thought, and you're going to be this thought, and then I swallow you. That's like, it's like hitting enter on the typewriter or carriage return. Chink, chink, next. Next bite, what are you going to be? Come and sit on my knee, like Santa Claus says. What do you want to be? This sort of thing. Or what do you want for Christmas? And you kind of like, while eating, you give instruction based on what you're thinking about to be embodied within your body. And when you're a breatharian, you don't sort of like need to capture long-term data that you would call your instincts. You just say, oh, yeah, I was just drawn to this or something like that. It's more or less you need less grounding. With higher clarity, you don't require the same amount of grounding. And let me be very clear about this, because clarity is not something that most people identify with coming in all of a sudden, right? Like spontaneous clarity. Maybe, through the use of substances, perhaps, that has occurred. But this is clarity that doesn't go away unless you start practicing lower vibration consistently.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could always practice lower vibration, trust me. You can always, dip your toe into the cold end of the lake. So food has a purpose in holding a structure of our intellect and thoughts together. So when you're eating something and you're thinking something, that's kind of going in. And if you have like a reservoir of recent thoughts, that goes in too. So like what you were thinking half an hour as you're thinking about getting food and that sort of thing, right? So, where was I? 1 second. Well, I sort of lost myself. Where was I going with this, Don?
You're asking me that? Well, get back to the question. How does practicing being a breatharian have anything to do with awakening your dormant DNA? And you had another aspect of food that you wanted to share about, which you kind of followed up there.
So, when you're looking at an experience, and you're wondering, like, where the hell did this come from? Like, how did I attract this? Give attention more and more to the fact that you might have eaten something and had this thought without directly thinking that you had the thought. Okay? And so these thoughts go into the food, which goes into the makeup of your physical body. Remember I was saying if you don't give instruction, that it doesn't go into your body. It just goes through you, right? And I don't mean it goes through like diarrhea. It just doesn't get digested, right?
So like what you're saying though is, if you get depressed and you take a pint of ice cream and you sit there watching a Lifetime movie, okay, and you're eating it, that it's not necessarily the pint of ice cream that plays the biggest role in how you deal with it. It's the fact that you are infusing that ice cream with the depression that you're experiencing while you're eating.
Yes. You'll note there's some subtleties that take in play as well, like your associations with ice cream, for instance.
Right.
Like if you identify ice cream as being a comfort food, that would make it not entirely a negative experience. It might support in a comforting way. And it'll store it in areas of your body that tend to access your comfort nodes and this sort of thing. And it's really, really super complex and super organized. So we can get into the nitty-gritty of like how it all, the journey of a food molecule or something like that.
Right.
But for the most part, we are eating calories with identities that we give them. And the more, I don't want to say moisture is involved in it, the more, or the wider a definition you can give. But yes, the more water is in the food that you're eating, or a latent relationship with water, the more you have to say over it.
So, okay.
And the more sugar you have, it tends to have less. You have less control over it. A little bit less control over its designated purpose.
Going back to the same example of depression. Depression is the thing that you're experiencing. So there's a difference, though, if you choose to eat, say, some cheddar cheese versus drinking alcohol, for example, and going back to the ice cream. So those three things will play different roles.
Dramatically different roles.
Dramatically roles, and it's not. And so you're saying that it's not necessarily the alcohol content of the whatever you're drinking, but the fact also that it's that much wetter.
Let me put it another way. You can mentally block the effect of alcohol if you want to entertain the thoughts of it being blocked when you drink it.
Right.
Because there's so much water and alcohol. The more you get closer to liquor, less likely. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What were the two other examples you had? Cheese and
cheddar cheese.
And ice cream.
Yeah.
So cheese has a decent moisture content, not a great moisture content.
Yeah, I was trying to think. The thing that came to me was Oreos at first, and then you talked about the sugar, and so I thought, okay, I've got to, trying to come up with something less liquidy, but not with the sugar that Oreos might have. So
right now, cheese has a lot of stories behind cheese. It's very ancient in terms of a product for getting all your dairy vitamins and being able to keep it from going bad over a longer period of time, right? So you got cheese building. And so it has a very large and wide historic background. When we look at cheese today, there really should be nothing wrong with it at all, we might say, as a milk protein, except that we've put into the mix this idea that cow's milk is not so good for us, and that, the best milk for us is maybe goat's milk or even breast milk, right? Like human breast milk. Get into research, start drawing the lines, and start... Hold on. Have I got a commercial playing? How did I do that? Okay. That's what happens when you got other windows open. So in the story of cheese, most cheeses are very exhibit a great deal of creativity. Eventually, the creativity wears off. You've gone to a supermarket. You've seen all the cheese. You've tried them all. It's no longer an exploration as it was maybe 100 years ago, right? So 100 years ago, cheese had a higher value per eating content, we might say, than it does today for your average Western nation. People might even critique over two cheddars not being equal, that sort of thing.
Right, exactly.
So, there's still dynamicness there, but it's not nearly as valuable as it used to be, we might say, for the human body, unless you are absolutely addicted to cheese and you love it and it's beautiful and all this sort of thing. Again, if you identify with addiction, I'm a cheese addict, and you identify with addicts not being such healthy circumstances to live within as a definition, then you also can create self-sabotaging vibrations that go with that as well. Speaking of ice cream, yes, you can love it, but you could also say, it's a dessert, you can't live off this, all this sort of jazz full of sugar, I'm lactose intolerant, it just adds up. It's cold, and cold, turns off the digestive tract. If you think of all these things, they're all going to apply, right? But is ice cream detrimental to a 6-year-old like it is an adult who considers all these things? In the adult's world, Possibly. Because they also invite the child into the world that also exists with their definition. Right? But a child who comes across ice cream all on his own has never been told a thing about it being something you should only have at dessert and all this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
For all we know, they want to live off ice cream for the rest of their lives, and they won't hear anything anyone else has to say about it.
Exactly.
So, regarding diet, it is a program. So you can treat it as a program, or you can just enjoy the pre-existing programs that lay out there. Like if, kombucha sounds all good within your intellectual scope of things, and it is, and it serves you. But when you get to Breatharianism, and this is where we're going to get closer to the Ascension and Aliens element, this level of clarity allows you to walk through so many obstacles that are in our world right now. And I don't mean like walk through and not be challenged, but sort of like gives you this sort of whole new lease on the approach and the confidence, so that you can really sort of like step up your game, call it step up your game, but really step up this element of confidence within yourself, because you have a sense for a higher sense of guidance of value in a very moment-to-moment situational and opportunistic way of looking at it. A lot of people, they're going off of what they've established their belief is going to be, and then they remember it for when they want to use that knowledge, right?
Right.
Like people are book smart, they study their books and all this sort of thing. So the day when it comes around, oh, hey, what do I need to know about this? Oh, I memorized this.
Mm-hmm.
But situationally, we're moving into a world that is much more dreamlike than anything we've ever known. Much more like jumping into the movie The Matrix capabilities of a world can be entirely, visualized, from the programmer's point of view. So under this aspect of sovereignty and choice, one needs to have a greater sense of guidance, even at the intellectual level.
Sure.
And this guidance is not intellectual. It is more like the intellect stepping aside to receive more from the higher self and trust the higher self. So most of this journey comes through stages of people basically coming to a new relationship with their body and with their mind. So much so that body, mind, spirit are really a truly equal. You would never say one is more valuable than the other. You would truly say that they all take place and they all participate, in sequence sometimes and sometimes simultaneously. So the treatment of our body as the temple, imagine, you create a temple, and the quality of your temple determines how much or how likely, the deities are going to come visit it, we'll just say. So in that way, your mind identifies with that possibility, consciously or unconsciously, almost doesn't matter. The subconscious part of the mind also associates with this, where you may receive more. You may have a greater, relationship. So even though you may be very, we'll just say egotistical, there's been an opportunity recently, especially through September, to sort of slap you on the ass physically and get you into an opportunity to transform your body real quickly without necessarily the permission of your mind, which we call very distressing in some traditional ways. But when you know and have a sense for what the deeper meaning is coming of this, you get excited like I do. Right. You look at everything as like, oh yeah, I can't wait. I want to shake the hand of everybody I'm going along, saying thank you. Yeah, I've been wanting to be here for quite some time, and you may not identify being a welcoming community because I haven't given you that definition yet, but it's very nice to see you. And yeah. Okay, I love what you've done with the place. That sort of thing. It hasn't changed, but I love what you've done with the place. Completely different attitude, which is, easily one of gratitude when you start to identify just how much one little thing like a surgery does for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying like, oh no, I've got, scars or something like that. Like that's like, hey, I'm going to heal that in about 2 weeks when I choose to. That's the direction you're going. Like this idea that I've like, gone and, gone to Western medicine and sort of feel like I've gone the wrong way. I should have healed this all naturally and all this and everything. No, I was actually too much into trying to heal it naturally
Right.
without respecting that. Honestly, I'm not actually against Western medicine doing their thing. I would like the hospitals to be around in the future. I'd love to see these nurses around when new technology comes out and they can do something a whole lot more differently. And when people are asking me like, how do you feel? I was like, I think this is a good argument for why cannabis is now legal in this state. Only one of two that's legal. I was like, maybe there's something to this curing cancer with cannabis, that I can look into, that sort of thing. Not that, there's a whole lot of time on my hands to sort of like suggest that I'm just going to become a pothead or something, but it just it's like the doors of comfort are already existed there, before I got there.
Right.
It's kind of like I mapped this out before I got to this point somehow. I mean, then again, I didn't vote for it. I just, took advantage of the fact that this state is getting quite competitive in that environment.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, oh, hey, great. Whatever. Let people who like that stuff enjoy it. And now there's even opportunity for me to go somewhere with going to that next level. It may even, end up being prescribed to me for some reason. I don't know. So, all that being said, how does that apply to aliens? Well, if some of you have read or gotten into David Wilcock's last book, there's quite a bit of information about extraterrestrials. And I don't know if you got this far, Don, because I know you were reading the book too.
Right.
But David Wilcock gets into how they're looking at us as getting ready to be a part of a galactic community. And in order to be a part of the galactic community, they really only have so much interest in involving themselves meeting us, right? But those who are in the starseed, in the light worker, or in that environment where they are working on themselves and going through these kinds of physical transformations, as an example, there's many ways to go through transformations. These are the people that would be able to easily make sense. In fact, these kinds of people, I'm going to count myself included. I'm not trying to put myself on a pedestal here. These kinds of people may even look at early disclosure as some sort of joke, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or even the first meetings with extraterrestrials is like, come on.
Right.
You didn't have to tell us you existed. Get over it. Let's get to the next stage. We know you existed. You're like, why are you taking your time? Why do we have to wait another year before we see you again or whatever? What's this all about? Come on, let's just, let's hurry it up. Well, as it suits, there will be a great deal of transformation when the general public is hit by just this sort of like line across that says, they're here and they're ready. When we're ready, things can go forward when people start organizing and saying, well, how can we get more ready? What does it take to be ready? And groups of individuals who are familiar with maybe the Ascension journey can be a part of, what everyone wants to know. Hey, what do we got to do? What do we got to do? Get replicators, teleporters, and flying saucers and all this other thing. Well, we need a minimum of people that are able to cope with their kind of societal views, which means that we need to release our own perspectives of, how everything should work. Because things work quite differently, very differently. I watched, I was inspired to watch Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy yesterday. And every time I saw stuff, I was like, yep, it's just about that silly. I mean, that is, the Pleiadians talking in my head. I was like, yeah, what is it that, they got some really funny names there too. Zaphod Zebelbrub or something like that. It's like,
yeah.
crazy name. But when you begin this element of sort of disclosure, and I don't mean disclosure, I want to say like extraterrestrials disclosing themselves, right? Like when this is what I'm calling like disclosure part 2. One is kind of like, okay, we know you're out there, come on out, that sort of thing. That's kind of like when that stage is done, then there's a stage where on a more public scale, there is a lot more meetings and that sort of thing that that takes place honestly when governments and elements of logistics of human society are at a much more manageable place for being able to integrate anything that they have to bring without an immediate sort of like, no, we can only tape recordings of you and then edit the recordings and, per our prerogative for what we feel is, appropriate. It pretty much has to be something like where everybody is willing to release their television system so that they can, immediately have the opportunity, everybody across the world, to get broadcasts, this sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So all those sorts of things take place. I'm not saying that's how it's going to happen, but I'm saying that is how the universal mind sort of sees it. And it's not that they're better than us, but they don't want to show up with any possibility that we think they're better than us, right? It's not like, oh, we can wait because, we're infinitely patient. They're no less patient than we are, to be quite clear. And patience is not something that changes a whole lot just because you're going through an Ascension shift. Mind you also that Ascension has no needle on it. It's a progressive, more like cloud moving situation, and which is appropriate because David Wilcock talks about how we're moving into this special sort of like galactic precession of the equinox cloud, like we're moving into this space, and how originally we would be apexing around 2012, but we weren't ready, right? So we held on to a timeline that still had some cheap shots against humanity, but was following a path where people who are more patient were going to live on this path. Ascension did happen back in 2012, so people who were less patient, but resulted in a whole different sort of turnout of who sort of like woke up and, who went back into the incarnation grid and said, oh, I'm going to try this out another way. Or they would jump over this timeline between lives. Let's just say there's, apocalyptic situations. They say, oh, actually, I still want to succeed here, so I got to go back to a slower timeline where it takes a little bit longer for it to take place. Because those who normally acquire the information about 2012, those channelings or messages from ancient times, you have to understand they were not as large a galactic community. They're much smaller groups of people, and they were much more optimistic about the message, right? So there's room for a little bit of fudging here, a little bit of moving the dial, especially since they are historically still a conglomerate of our own chosen memories that we have that we give ourselves. Like all history is your own chosen existence. It's kind of like when you come into your body, you sort of like scribble up a general idea of what your past is and what your background is, and you get a world with that the way it is there. A lot of them take it because it's like on a menu, like, oh, I'll just order this, and they take that and you just pick that up. But some people do tend to go into the fine levels of the script. Anyways, as you know, time has passed, has been flying for today. As I can easily get into all sorts of tangents and interesting things.
But I do have a question.
And
I don't know if I think we started to try to get into this before, but I don't think we got too far, and this was when we lost contact with each other. Okay. But the Pleiadians talked about September, the fact that we were going to see flyovers everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
and it was going to become more and more obvious. And you know, I didn't see considerable.
Images.
I didn't, and that's just me. I didn't see considerable evidence of that. And I wonder if they could just address what we did experience and
Pleiadians are
that sort of
saying, "What are you waiting for? Get on the YouTubes."
Okay, they're out there.
Okay, they're out there. And if you want to look at channels that normally carry UFO videos, you
Hmm.
can see the upticks directly there.
Okay.
So you can see the number of videos has increased. You can see it in people who have voice, who do voice reporting,
Hmm.
that they talk about an increase. Okay, I haven't done this research. This is what I'm
Yeah.
being told.
I'm
Okay,
usually pretty comfortable
so
with
between
with
you and I, we didn't need any visitation. We
no.
didn't need any sightings. I don't know if our audience needed any sightings or already had them. But if you're still wondering, then basically, get onto the YouTube channels and find out what you missed. If there's
No,
something
that's.
to have
I just
missed.
wanted to bookend that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
Note that
topic.
the UFO subject has gotten very big in September.
Hmm.
Has gone to whole nother levels, including a wiki leak.
Yes, with Podesta's emails and.
Podesta's emails, talking with celebrities about, disclosure and UFOs and things like that. So it's not far away in terms of, just sort of like a public acknowledgement that
Right.
everybody's pretty cool with the conversation. Note, that's all we need. All we need is
Hmm.
people to be pretty cool, and
Right.
then it's all over like flypaper. I mean,
Okay. Cool.
everybody will be talking about it all over the place like flypaper. I think David Wilcock's book has done a lot. I think Guy on TV has done a lot. I think there's a lot of sources that have done a lot. And for the most part, their biggest part of the message wasn't the flyovers, that everyone would believe in UFOs, or that we would be at that tipping point in September. Okay?
Very good.
All right. Anyhow, we're rolling into the last couple minutes. I want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Might have gone longer. Could have easily gone longer, but I think, as we're moving through these times, there's a lot of very, I don't want to say stress individuals, but people who are feeling a little bit like things are going out of control a little in their lives. I'm here if you want to reach out and send me a text or a message or an email. You can send an email by finding my email, I think, on my website, julianwells.com. You can book a session, as always.
Yeah, you. That's what I was going to ask you. You are doing sessions.
I
And,
am still doing sessions. I haven't altered the prices yet. That's still I'm not sure exactly when that's going to take place. So I still, I'm open to sessions again. My health is in a much better position at this point. And logistically, things are working out a lot better for me. So if you do want to have a conversation, I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. We'll put it that way. Easy to find on Facebook too. And if I have time, well, then I'll talk with you. But sessions are really convenient, and you get recordings and all that sort of thing. And you usually cover a lot more ground if we're doing it by voice. I'm not handing out my phone number yet. But it's easy to find my YouTube channel, and this will be posted on the YouTube channel a little bit later. I know it starts on Facebook, but this will propagate when I eventually download the Facebook file and get it onto YouTube. So, I'm not ignoring my my YouTube subscribers or fans. And of course, you can like and add comments there. That's also a really great place to possibly catch me with a question about something you might have found here.
Mhm.
And Don, if you want to speak with Don, he's almost always available for a chat or an
Sure.
email or something like that. How's the best way to contact you?
Find me on Facebook
On
and
Facebook.
You toss my name around there so they can
Yeah.
easily find the Don Murphy that links to me. There's a
Yeah.
lot of them around the world. So,
Okay.
yeah, that's the easiest way.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to say cheerio for tonight. Thank you, everyone, for all the support and loving energy during my recovery. I absolutely appreciate it, and I return that energy at this time in thanks.
And thank you, Julian, for being so open and sharing with your journey.
Yeah,
And yeah,
yeah. So we'll see what's more to come. Maybe next time I'll be showing you an empty plate and with no fork or with no fork or spoon. Be like, this is
that
my meal today.
there we go. We get a little bit less talk about colons and intestines and that kind of stuff. It would be easier.
Talk about Superman stuff.
There we go.
All right.
Okay, thanks. Good night,
All
everybody.
right. Good night, everyone.